There's a really lovely book by Rebecca Solnit called Wanderlust, A Brief History of Walking. And as the name of the book implies, it's about walking practices in different fields, and how concepts and philosophies and ideas are kind of pinned to the practice of walking. And one particular chapter, quite early on in the book, which is called The Mind at 3 miles an hour, in that chapter she gives some relationships that have been exploited about thinking and walking. Thinking and walking are often thought of as going together. And if memory serves me, she cites the Greek philosophers, who were sometimes referred to as the Peripatetics because of their habit of kind of ambling in the arcades. I think she cites Charles Darwin and his sand walk, which was a walking space he had at the back of his house down. I believe she also cites the flaneurs of Paris, Baudelaire particularly. I don't think she cites the derives of the situationists, but she might do. If she didn't, she possibly could. But this kind of relationship between walking and thinking is pretty well established, I think, and has a lot of mileage to it. Well, let's go in here, pups. Come on, I want to get this out of this map. Come on, down you go. Come on. Anyway, what I'm thinking of is, why is it 3 miles an hour? Which is, I guess, in a sense, it's probably arbitrary in terms of Solnit's writing. But certainly what I find when I'm going on these walks is that there's a certain pace I can walk at, and this is not it that I'm doing right now. There's a certain pace I can walk at, which is kind of conducive to a certain mental state in which thoughts seem to flow relatively freely. And there are speeds at which I can walk, and terrains that I can walk over actually, which are either counterproductive or produce different kinds of thinking, suggest different modes of thought almost. And she says 3 miles an hour, which is just slightly slower than the pace one would normally walk at if one is actually going anywhere, as an appointment to keep. And I think that's, for me at least, that's quite right. Actually, I walk a bit slower than 3 miles an hour, I'm thinking. Certainly I find that if I walk too fast, if I walk at 4 miles an hour, if I'm trying to get away from another dog, or if I'm in a hurry to get home because I've got to go to work or something like that, if I'm walking more than 3 miles an hour, I find my thoughts loaded with intention or purpose or endpoints. I find myself, what do I think about myself? I find myself not thinking quite openly. Conversely, if I stand still like I'm doing right now, I find myself doing what I'm doing right now, which is kind of endlessly pausing in my thoughts and kind of arrested and kind of uncertain and ambiguous. I'm not quite sure which way to move in terms of my thoughts. But if I can hit the right stride, particularly if it's an environment that I'm relatively familiar with, so I'm not being taken by surprise or my attention isn't drawn to events and objects that I'm not used to, then I do find my thoughts just kind of flow naturally. And what does that mean, for thoughts to flow naturally? A couple of things I'm thinking about in that. The first thing I'm thinking of is, whilst I'm walking at a certain pace, I can kind of feel that only a small percentage of my attentional resources are being given to the act of walking. I'm barely thinking about walking at all. A little bit, but not much. A little bit like I kind of imagine it like a carrier frequency, a little beat in the background that's just keeping the machinery moving, but not creating so much psychic noise that nothing else is going on, or that's demanding so much attentional resources that I have to actually think about what I'm doing and where I'm going. And in that it parallels other kinds of activities. I find driving under certain situations similar. Commands a certain amount of attentional resources, just enough to keep my brain on track, but not so much that I have to actually think about what I'm doing consciously. Sometimes things like shaving, actually, or being in the shower. Those are other situations in which I kind of have to think about what I'm doing, but at a very low level of attention. It's a directed kind of narrative activity. It has a beginning, middle, and an end to it, but it doesn't. But the shape of that activity doesn't command so much attention that I have to think about what I'm doing and commit to it. There's lots and lots of attention and resources left over for all this extraneous stuff. And as I say, walking feels like one of those. It feels like a particularly relevant one of those, because it has this kind of natural narrative line to it. Every step that I take feels consequential. It seems to, it naturally follows on from the previous one in a kind of schematic form. It's just the sense of a progression, but not all the content of a progression. So again, I think it's acting like this kind of carrier frequency. I think there's also a sense in which it has a relationship to that kind of effortless action concept that you find in Chinese philosophy, I think, certainly not non-Western philosophies, in which walking, if done at a certain pace, is kind of effortless. I'm just leaning forward into the direction that I'm moving, and letting my legs just swing under me and catching the weight. So I'm not resisting gravity particularly. There's not huge amounts of proprioceptive activity being used to kind of defy the physical realities of the situation that I'm in. The largely kind of Newtonian physics that are operating on me are kind of being exploited in the most economical way if I'm moving at the right speed. If I move too slow, it's a bit halting, and I have to kind of feel the weight of my legs lifting and falling. My arms don't swing in a natural rhythm because they're not acting like natural pendulums. They're kind of weights that I'm carrying around with me. And again, if I walk too fast, I have to be too purposive about where I'm putting my feet, and the rhythm is set up in a kind of different way. But around about 3 miles an hour, or just slightly slower, I do get this sense that oh God, this is going to sound so pretentious. I do get this sense that the kind of the world is working with me, and gravity is working through me, and my mind and the weights and levers and pulleys and all that sort of stuff that's operating my body are all kind of involved in the same project. It's kind of organisation. It's my proprioception, my psychophysiology is being kind of organised, except when you slip in mud like I just did just there. Completely takes it out from under you. It can be interesting at the same time, but it doesn't certainly allow me to get that sense that there's just this slow progress through physical terrain matching this amble through conceptual terrain that accompanies it. This step of one thought after another. Anyway, I'm at the end of my walk with the dogs today. It's been quite interesting. I've seen a canal boat pushing its way through the ice and getting stuck. I've seen a whole bunch of new dogs I've never seen before. People riding bikes. And all the time I've been kind of falling endlessly forward at 3 miles an hour.